All right, Uncle Tony. All right. I'm throwing you under the bus. Just gonna happen right now. Nah, just kidding, buddy. Listen, I'm gonna talk to you guys about classic cars and why I think you need to modify them most of the time. And Uncle Tony seems to think you shouldn't. And I gotta agree with you on the disc brake thing. Yeah, some of the disc brake kits that you get aren't designed correctly to go on the car by themselves, and people use them incorrectly. So they'll buy a disc brake kit and they'll put it on a classic car and only do the front brakes and not do the master cylinder and not do the rear brakes as it's required on some models. But modifying a classic car, in my opinion, most of the time is almost always a must. And I'm going to go over some engineering flaws that they had in the 60s on not just Volkswagens, but on some other makes and models that were absolutely dangerous. And for some reason, they got through engineering. So if you have a classic car, you need to get to know what things are on your classic car that need to be modified so you can drive them on today's roads safely. This VW bus, absolutely, the gearing on these things was terrible. It's a must to do something about that. I say the minimum on one of these old VW buses is have a big nut box in the back, or even if you have a small nut, put larger tires on it so you at least it would go down the highway at a speed where it is safe, to stay in traffic. And if you're going to be a daily driver in the state of California, I really don't recommend using a classic car as a daily driver in California in the big cities. If you're in a smaller city and you're out of the cities and out of the big cities and all that, you're not driving on the highways, you might be okay. But in the big cities, it is absolutely dangerous with these big trucks driving. I've been almost run off the road by some of them. It's just too crazy. People just aren't ready to see an old car driving down the road slow, or they don't have the stopping power that the newer ones do. There's a lot of differences between the old ones and the new ones. Under window number 2 is a non-Volkswagen. Guess what? Mike is not just a Volkswagen guy. I do Volkswagens, and I was also a Chevy guy. And I'll talk about that in another video. But I'm a really big on Chevys, not really big on Dodges and those other things, and I'll explain to you why in the other video. But this is a 1963 Nova Super Sport convertible, and we won't be showing you that today, but I'm going to talk about this car, so I wanted to at least show you that I do have it. The rear leaf springs on this car over time would start to flex out. And what happens on these cars is when you hit about 70 miles an hour, there's something called the death wobble. These are the types of things you need to know about your old cars. They had problems like this that you need to address if you're going to drive it as a daily driver. The leaf springs on these would flex in the front and rear of the axle and result in the axle twisting, which would make one side of the wheel go forward and the other side to go back as it twisted back and forth. And what this caused is something called the death wobble, and it didn't have a track bar, which is a bar that goes up to the frame up here, like some of the newer cars do. So it didn't have that, and because it didn't have any support, what would happen is you're going down the road and the back end of the car would start to do this, and it does it randomly. I've actually had that car do that on me, and it scared the hell out of me, and that's one of the reasons I stopped driving it. Obviously you can see the paint and other things were other issues. So that's one of the reasons it's sitting in here. Someday, future project, I really like to do this car. It also has a lot of rust issues that I repaired on it, and It does have all the trim. It's a really bitchin' car. But that death wobble is something absolutely you need to know about your Classic. Every one of these older cars had some sort of an issue. And you need to find out what they were and get to know the car and repair those problems and address them with some updates before you really use it as a daily driver in a safe way. And you have to get to know your make, your model, what were the issues, and you may have to drive it and learn about it and then make the modifications as you get to know it. And the way I look at it is this: look, if you can't modify the car, if you're not a person who can re-engineer it, you probably shouldn't be driving it as a daily. That's just my opinion. Because you really don't know the car well enough, because it's not a new car and it's not going to be driven and used like a normal car is. It's not going to drive like your 1990s or 2000s or 2010s car. It's just not going to drive the same. So as well as it not driving the same, there are some major engineering flaws with a lot of the older cars. And you know, he was talking about in his video about it being post freeway system in. The cars were built more for that. It was kind of like really, but before they really were engineered and built for the highways, it was really into the mid 70s. And then you had a safer car. A lot of the cars built in the mid 70s were based on the earlier platforms, and they actually improved the geometry, the steering angles, the problems they were having, like the rear end on that car just doing this going down the highway. Once you hit a certain speed randomly, you're just driving it, all of a sudden you'll just, I literally almost couldn't keep it. I almost spun out on the freeway when it did it to me. I let off the gas and I was like, oh my God. And I was just like hanging on, trying to keep it in the lane. And thank goodness there was nobody around me, but because if there was another car around me, if there had to panic stop at that point, I probably would have wrecked that car. And if you've never driven with me, I'm a really damn good driver. So if you think that that's an issue, think again. One of my employees was with me in this thing. We were going 95. Yeah, and it was the speed limit. It was in Montana, and a car cut me off. And I put two wheels into the center divider and I didn't crash. I know how to drive. Two wheels on dirt, two in pavement, and I stayed together at 95 miles an hour in that car. So there's a lot of good aftermarket stuff that's made for these cars, especially your Volkswagen parts. Most of the stuff that you buy, say even the MP disc brake kits, work really, really well. And one of the problems with these old Volkswagens is people failed to adjust the brakes. It's just a pain in the butt. You have to do it a lot. And you probably aren't going to want to do that. And you're going to do like most people did back in this era. And you are going to fail to adjust your brakes. And your brake pedal is going to bounce off the floor once before you pump it the second time and it works. In a panic situation, that's not going to be a good result. So, to steer free from that, the best way is to go to the disc brake kit in the front. They really work well. Some things for some cars, like some of the Dodges and some like that, you know, the aftermarket parts don't work as well. A lot of them are like based on just like they'll have it. So you have front disc brake kit and the rear drums aren't designed for it, and it doesn't have the right proportioning valve. On these Volkswagen kits, they're fine. I absolutely would upgrade the brakes if you are going to use it as a daily. These are still drum. I don't drive them daily all the time. I do drive them quite often. I select times and days when it's a good day. It's also a good rule of thumb, if you're going to use a Classic as a daily, to have another car for snow days, especially for snow and salt, and also have another car for rainy days, because it's not even you that's the driving. I'm talking about the other people that are driving on the road that wreck into you in a car that has absolutely no safety features like this metal dash. That's going to be a great day if you have to touch that thing with your face. So chances are it won't happen, but if it's on most accidents happen during the rain, unfortunately. And if you stay out of this car when it's raining, you're going to give yourself maybe possibly a few more years of your life to live to enjoy it. And the car is also going to be a lot happier because it's not going to be wrecked into a pretzel that you can't fix, because these things didn't take a hit at all. Most of these old cars, you know, when they got in an accident, they were totaled. It wasn't safety features back in the early 60s for most cars. So this fine 1966 Volkswagen bus was the first year of safety. And I think the only thing that it came with was seat belts in the front seat was part of the safety stuff from that day. And I think they started the 5-mile-an-hour bumper thing around that time too, but I'm not really sure that these bumpers held 5 miles an hour. I think they probably would collapse. But anyway, I think they had that around then. They had a few other safety things. You can always look them up yourself. But 1966 was one of the first years of safety. This one does not have well, it does now, but it did not come with originally a dual reservoir master. Okay, UTG, here's one for you. Dual reservoir master versus single reservoir master. This bus behind me has a single reservoir master. I had it original when I first got it, and then I got this wonderful gem. This is a 1967 VW bus, has exactly the same brake system except for one thing. It has a dual reservoir master. So why is it, with exactly the same brake system, that this bus stops 2 to 3 times better than the other one, just with a different master? In fact, I think I used the same brake drums and everything from that bus because they were in great shape, and I had changed it over to disc brakes. Why is that? Kind of interesting. I'll explain it to you. When you have dual reservoir masters, you have 2 sets of brake pressure. So you have your front brake pressure and you have your rear brake pressure. And when you push the pedal, they push simultaneously. And what happens is the rear circuit and the front circuit are always going to be a little bit different. And that's why they invented later proportioning valves and this sort of thing. But what you'll find is with a single reservoir master, the pedal has to push all 4 drums. One piston, one actual cup has to push all 4 of those wheels. And what happens is your rear and your front are on a little bit different of adjustment. And so what happens is it takes more energy to get all 4 of those with that same single piston. Where if you have a dual piston master cylinder with 2 pistons and 2 reservoirs, it takes less, it has more hydraulic leverage is what I'm trying to explain to you. There's more hydraulic leverage for the front and the rear. Hey, all I know is this bus stops 2 to 3 times better than that one did with the exact same drum brakes, exact same parts. Everything else is exactly the same except for the dual reservoir master. Only difference. So there's nothing wrong with updating this brake system to a dual reservoir master. Sometimes, I'm not going to say it's going to do it every time because I don't know every car, but I know on these it definitely makes a big difference. It will give you a lot more braking power. If you can't afford to go to the disc brakes, then it's better just to at least go with the dual reservoir master as a starting point. Upgrade. Another thing I heard in the video was you got to have power disc brakes for them to have better stopping power. And I don't know what year, make, model car he was referring to, but it really, again, this is so broad. There's a lot of different year, make, model cars, And when you have, it depends on which year, make, and model you have to know whether you really need to go to the power disc brakes. Because I'm going to tell you, this bus right here has no power brake booster, and it stops way better than if it with disc brakes than it did without them. So it's about twice as much stopping power with just the dual reservoir master. Then when you go to the and better control is also important. Then when you go to the disc brake kit that's on this one, it uses a lot of parts from later model buses, so it was engineered pretty well. It has the other bus I have has solid rotors. This one has vented, and both of them stop way better than the original. It doesn't want to skid the rear brakes before the front stop, nothing like that. Those are all things that you need to know when you do your re-engineering. And if you can't do that, sorry to tell you, classic cars are probably not for you. You need to know the difference of what something is and something isn't. So when you drive it, you do a full skid stop, if your rear brakes are locking up before your front and your proportioning valve, or you don't have a dual reservoir master, or whatever, you're missing something in the line there, you need to make sure that's corrected before you start using the car as a daily. So I'm going to talk to you real quick about something called hydraulic leverage. This is why they went to disc brakes over drum. I mean, think about it. Drum brakes has way more surface. You got this big giant brake shoe and this big giant drum surface. Why shouldn't it stop better? Again, I would take this dual reservoir master from a 67 and I would put it in any year Volkswagen bus earlier than 1967. Should work great for any years, even the ones with the smaller drums in the front. Honestly, that would be my opinion. That's what I would do. First thing is change the, in fact, I would go straight to disc brakes, but if you can't afford it, go with the dual reservoir master. At least it'll be a huge improvement in stopping power. So I know this is kind of a crude drawing, but let's just say, let's put some vents on here so we can just say that's a vented rotor. Okay, this is why disc brakes work so much better than drum. And a lot of people don't know this. The distance between this brake pad and this rotor, and this brake pad and this rotor, is very, very small. And because of that, you can run a very large piston on your caliper. So when you have a very large piston on your caliper, because it doesn't need to travel very far, it only needs to go from here to here, which usually is maybe about a 1/16 of an inch or something like that, or less. It doesn't need to travel very far. You can have a very large piston on your wheel at your caliper and have a very small piston at your master cylinder. And guess what that does? It's like taking a giant crowbar and putting it on your wrench. You know, when you put the pipe over the end of your wrench and you can get all that leverage, that's basically what's happening in hydraulic world. Is you have a nice small piston on one end pushing a large piston over here, and that gives you, like, you know, whatever, 30, 40, 50 to 1 ratio on your hydraulics versus, say, 1 to 1. And so what happens is, on most cases, not all cases, even without power disc brakes, because they didn't always have power with disc brakes, you can have power, you can have disc brakes with no power. And with this setup right here, especially on your VW, you have a lot more stopping power. So I'm going to tell you right now, that bus stops way better than with drum brakes. And let's explain why drum brakes have a problem and why they wanted to improve to this new system. When you have a brake drum and you have a brake shoe, okay, there's constantly, this shape is varying, okay? They wear into the drums. When you first put your brand new shoes on, they're going to wear more in the middle than out here. And as they wear in, because this circumference is slightly different than this, it's going to wear in. But there's constantly varying area that's actually stopping on this drum. And because that's constantly changing as your adjuster, your automatic adjuster, or if you have a brake adjuster keeps changing, you're going to constantly have this arc is going to change. And because that's constantly changing, the amount of material that's actually being used on that brake shoe is less than what's used on these brake rotors. And see, these are things that they had to figure out over time. And now that's why most cars are all disc brakes, because they figured out in the 70s, you know, as the engineers came up with this idea of disc brakes, and first it was thought about heat, but it's actually about hydraulic leverage. Okay, that's the main key thing, is the hydraulic leverage of disc brakes is so much better. That's why they work better. That's why a smaller pad have more stopping power than a giant brake shoe. So there was arguments in the beginning, and even NASCAR, of course, didn't buy into it until after they realized, these do work better. So the kits made for these VW buses actually are well engineered for the car. This is where I agree with you, Uncle Tony, on some of this stuff, because a lot of the crap kits out there aren't. The ones that we have are they're based on parts off of later model Volkswagens that they use disc brakes, and that's why the kits work. Where you have problems with some of your Dodge products, I'm sure is probably big on that, because Dodge had a lot of varying things in different years and models. In fact, a lot of their engine parts wouldn't swap. It's one of the reasons I like Volkswagens and cars sporting the old bow tie, because a lot of the stuff they use evolved into, they use the same technology over and over and over and just tweaked it a little bit. Where, you know, like a small block Chevy, you can take heads from a small block Chevy, 283, 265, and you can put them on a small block 400. Just got to drill the holes for the water on them and they'll work. Where you try and do that with a Dodge, and I mean, my buddy had a 440, I think it was, and he bought an engine, and he wanted to put a stick shift tranny behind that engine, and the 440 was an automatic. Maybe you know about this. I'm not really big on Dodges. When I saw stuff like this, I went, skull and crossbones, no more. I'm done with you guys. What a pain in the butt. He was trying to get a stick shift tranny. He realized that you had to have a stick shift engine to run a stick shift tranny, because it didn't have a pilot, the hole in the crankshaft for the pilot bearing. Who does that? That's weird. Okay, that's Dodge. Okay, that's why I don't like Dodge. That's why I don't build them. I've never built them, and honestly, I didn't really think they were great looking cars. Tell me your thoughts on that. Or maybe if you were trying to build a Dodge as a daily, that's what the problem is. You can't do modifications to them very well, because everything was very specific. When in Volkswagens and in Chevys, a lot of the stuff interchanges through all the years. So you could use, like on that Nova in the garage, I could use disc brakes from a later model car that were like spindle, and they just changed to disc brakes. So a lot of things they did that they didn't do in the 60s, and they did in the mid 70s when they started putting a lot more safety mandates into cars, you could upgrade very easily and do that in a safe manner, because you could buy the entire set and it would all bolt in and fit, because it was from a later model like vehicle. Or maybe not. I don't know Dodges, okay? I'm not a Dodge guy at all. Like I said, I steered away from them many years ago. Same with Ford, because a lot of the stuff didn't interchange. I mean, okay, okay, Ford had some good things that I liked. I mean, you had the Fairlane, you had the Mustang, you had a few different things, and a lot of the front end parts would interchange. I know all about all that stuff. I used to do it. Like I said, I'm not just a VW guy. I just like VWs because I can take an engine, a 1954 Bug engine out, and I can put in a late model with dual carbs on it, and it'll just bolt right in. So those are the same reasons I like the Chevys, because the Chevys, you could interchange back and forth all the different years. A lot of things were the same. They would use the same engineering idea, and they would just modify it a bit and then make it work on the later models. Believe me, when you're trying to repair stuff, it is way easier when they use the same stuff. And you can go to Pick Apart and find another car with the same parts in it, or late model ones, or whatever, and interchange it. That's why I like to build Chevys back in the day. They were real easy. I could go down to Pick Apart. I could find even Cadillac, Oldsmobile, some of the parts were interchanged from those. I could go down and get Quadrajets, you know, build those all the time because they came with a Quadrajet manifold on a lot of the cars. You can go down to Pick Apart and you could pull the rods out of a Cadillac and put them in a, you know, get the thinner rods so you could get more fuel to your secondaries. And there's tons of things you can do to them. Again, you could use those in, you know, a lot of guys like the Hollies that went with the Fords and the Chrysler model stuff, and you know, those are all right, but they had a lot more issues to me. I could fix the problems on a Quadrajet and make it work really well and get power out of it and all kinds of stuff with a Chevy or BPOC. Tell me what that means in the comments. So back to the modifications. Should you modify your car? You know what? Again, in my opinion, you should do the right modifications. I would do, if I was going to drive as a daily, I would do a lot of modifications to something old. If it was built in the 60s, like if I'm going to drive that Nova as a late model, I'm going to change it to a later model rear end, put disc brakes in the front, and all that stuff would be standard on another vehicle. So I would know what proportioning valve to put in it, and I would do all of the stuff to make it work correctly. And you could do it with or without power brakes. If you didn't want power brakes, you don't have to. It just depends on what disc brakes you put on it. And you know, you need to know about the stuff that I'm talking about. Try it, drive it, see if it does stop better. If it doesn't, then you put the power brakes on it and you just deal with it. Yeah, okay, well, geez, I got to put on power brakes. I have a booster on there. I don't want one. So what? Deal with that. If you're going to drive it as a daily, you want it to be safe. But in all honesty, I really think you should leave your Classic as a Classic. Use it on the weekends. Use it on the good days. Take it to work for sure. But do it when it's safe, you guys. Don't do it when it's a bad day. You don't want to crash your old car. You don't want to get it, you know, ruined and totaled out. You know, you can't replace them. They're getting more and more scarce as time goes on. You take your old car McGee like this thing, take it to work. Better make it safe. You know, upgrade the braking system. Upgrade the gearing on the transmissions, so that you can drive with traffic instead of being a victim to somebody who doesn't see a car who's driving in the right lane very slow. I mean, literally, I've been driving in that VW bus, okay? And I was going 45 because I was following the electric bus. Of course, he was almost out of charge. We'll talk about that later. But he had to go really slow. And because he had to go really slow, you know, I almost got rear-ended by some girl who was just like, not ready. She wasn't texting. She wasn't. I could see her in the rear mirror, and I'm like going, "Oh my, oh no, oh!" All of a sudden, whoa! I see her hit the brakes, just slam on the brakes, because she just didn't expect to see somebody driving 45 in front of her in an old car. Just didn't expect it. People are going to be like that today with old classics. You're just not expecting to see these. You know, the young people have never seen one of these. They have never seen a car with the engine in the rear. They've never seen it. They don't know what that is. What? Air cooled? What the hell? They didn't make an air cooled car. Yes, they did. It's called a Volkswagen. It made tons of them. They were the most popular car in the 60s and 70s. And you know what? They're just not ready to see it. So you got to expect to be looking out for them, for their stupidness, okay? Because they just aren't going to know. You know, it's just, they just don't know. It's not being stupid, really. It's just because they just have never seen it before. You have to understand from their point of view that they're just, this is like seeing a elephant, you know, like walking down the street in California. You know, it would just kind of set you back. You're like, going, what the hell? I don't know. I wasn't ready for that. So you have to think like that if you're going to drive a classic as a daily. So if you're not ready to do that, don't do it. Don't do it if you're not ready for that. You know, if you're not ready to really be so proactive and look out for other people, don't drive one of these things. Don't drive an old classic. These things weren't made. This truck wasn't ever made to be driven on the street. This thing was just driven around Germany and fixed lights. I'm driving it on the highway out to car shows sometimes, and that is dangerous, but it's fun. And I don't do it enough for it to be that dangerous. But if I was driving this thing every day, holy mackerel, you know, I could get killed in this thing. You know, if you're in a small town in Georgia or you're in Tennessee, okay, I get it, all right? You know, that's cool. But the world and the United States is a big place. There's a lot of variations out there. Really look at your surroundings and think about where you are and think about what I'm talking about. Like, how many people are going to notice, how are they going to react when they see you driving in a car going 45 on the highway? Are they going to just like, you know, are they, you know, ask your kids, they'll tell you. You know, those are the types of things you need to think about. You need to think about them, not you. It's not about you. I'm a good driver. Okay, yeah, you can stay in your lane or whatever. That's fine. You got to think about the guy behind you who's never seen something like this. I'm like driving this thing. Nobody's ever seen one of these guys. It's like walking around naked. You drive this thing, it's like just walking around naked. Everybody they just stop and start looking at it. I get scared they're going to run into somebody when they watch me drive by in this thing. They just can't believe it. So you have to think for them. And the only way you can do that is limit your use. That's one thing you can do. The other thing you can do is modify your classic to make it safer. Find ways that you can do things to make it a safer daily. You know, using the stock car for what it was, I get it, Tony. You know, I understand. I agree with you to an extent, but there's also an extent of that I definitely disagree with, and I just don't. You know, great guy. I don't have anything against him. Love to do a collab with Tony sometime, maybe in the future. That might be possible. It would be fun. But driving a classic as a daily really is a choice you have to be educated about. You have to be willing to do some modifications and do the whole modification, not just part of it. What he said about the disc brake kits, I'm sure it's true on some Dodge products. Probably not very many Chevys. And because Chevy used the same rear drum brakes in the 60s as they did in the 70s, and if you get a 70s front disc brake kit and a 70s proportioning valve, it's probably going to work pretty good. So you know, Dodge kind of goes like all over the place. So I just don't know that much about them. I don't know all the details of them, so I can't help you with that. But you know, generically, he might be able to tell you more about that than I do. Maybe that's why he says don't modify your classic. But I honestly, you know, if you can't handle looking up, doing research, finding out the issues with the car, finding out the safety problems like that Nova, I'm telling you, I will not drive the thing on the freeway ever again until it has track bars on it and a different rear end. No chance I'm getting on the freeway again. I've already almost wrecked it. Not going to happen again. So you don't want to learn this stuff the hard way. You want to learn it the smart way and do your research ahead of time. Be willing to do the modifications that work properly and find out which things they are and make the car safe, because in the 60s it might not have been, because there was no safety regulations back then. So anyway, I'll talk to you guys in the next video. I hope you enjoyed this and it's good content for you. Talk to you next one. No offense, Uncle Tony. Wasn't really trying to do that.